And so what will happen is 5, 10 years from now, there will be a new generation of people sitting in these seats who not only will not value our collective stories and history, but won't even know. And so it's important that we keep, uplifting these type of efforts. So I would once again give a warm round of applause to everybody who's participating and all those folks that have contributed to uplifting and telling our stories. So give them all a round of applause. Our presenters this afternoon include Dr. Obita Shaka, Betty Reid, Soskin, and Reverend Dr. Martha Taylor, focusing on the migration of African Americans in the Bay Area and beyond. And Dr. Tashaka will be the first presenter. He has a slideshow, and he's always compelling with his information. Let me give you a little bit of background about him. He's an activist, scholar, professor, author, and visionary organizer. Active in the Black Freedom Movement since 1960, Dr. Tashaka is a professor emeritus at San Francisco State University, where he taught for 38 years. So many people learned at his knees and at his feet. He spent 12 years as chairperson for the Black Studies Department. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the Western Institute of Social Research in Berkeley. Dr. Tashaka is the author of 5 books. His first book grew out of the organizing in the Civil Rights Movement, entitled The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. Currently, Dr. Tashaka is leading a major national and international campaign to strengthen Black families and community. So let's turn it over to Dr. Tashaka, and then I'll give you the bios for our other presenters as they present. Let's give it up for Dr. Tashaka.
Thanks, Davey D. This is a good brother here, Hard Knock Radio. I don't know if you listen to it. It's a radio show that deals with a variety of national, local, and international issues. It's good to have this brother here. I want to recognize my wife, Pamela Hurley Tashaka, in the back. You stand up there, give her a hand. Dr. Wade Nobles has been mentioned before. He's one of my colleagues, one of my Boon Coon colleagues, a conscious brother who's doing good work for African people. Right there, Wade. And his wife, Dr. Vera Nobles, who's a scholar in her own right. Give her a hand. Everyone is here, give yourself a hand for being here, especially these young folks. Glad to see you. My presentation is going to focus on the Black presence in the Bay Area. Part will deal with the pre-World War II, World War II presence, but the main focus is going to be on the movement that developed out of the migration of Blacks to the Bay Area, called the San Francisco Civil Rights Movement, which was Bay Area and statewide in its impact and is little known. In fact, it's hardly known. I want to start by saying that I'm a product of San Francisco, born in San Francisco, lived in Richmond for 13 years, and currently live in Oakland for the past 18 years. So you can say I'm a Bay Area product. And we talk about migration, just to acknowledge my father, much of the migration that occurs during World War II we know is due to work in defense plans. But many Blacks came before World War II, and some came during World War II and after for other reasons. One was the Ku Klux Klan, racist violence in the South. My father worked on a plantation in Orange, Texas, doing sharecropping, which was a variety of slavery where you worked and never got paid. And on his way, he was hauling a full load of cotton to the barn. The white boy's son, they called him master because it was just like slavery, stopped him and used the N-word. My father was 11 years old, and he had cleaned the clocks of just about anybody. That means whip him or beat him, for anybody that doesn't know, that messed with him. So my father got down and beat this white boy who was 18 years old to an inch of his life. Now, in the South, that was a lynching offense. That night, the owner came to my grandfather's shack And my father was there, and he told him, he said, your grandson, WH, if he does that again, we will lynch him. And my grandfather said, yes, sir. And so when he left, my grandfather said, I know how you feel, WH, because in Texas you live by initials, you WH, whatever your name is. That's important. You know what I mean? And so he told my father, it's a white man's country. I know how you feel, it's a white man's country. Do it again, they're gonna kill you. The next day, he's going across with a full load of cotton. He was 11 years old doing the work of a grown man. My father is very strong and very smart. This time, so-called old master crosses his tracks. So my father has rocks in his hand. He knows he's gonna have to fight, and he knows he's gonna have to get out of there. But this time, this is what they usually don't tell you about history. The owner of the plantation says, because in the South, you're a boy until you're dead. 100 years old, you're still a boy. And he said to my father, 11 years old, how you doing, Mr. W.H.? My father said, fine. He says, how you like to come to work with me? My father said, does it involve picking cotton? He says, no. He says, does it pay more? He says, twice as much. My father said, fine. And that was the story. But then a while later, the Klan came to his house and threatened to lynch him. And that was the reason why my father left the South. So there's not just migration for the sake of jobs. Now, in the San Francisco Bay Area, you had in 1930s, hardly any blacks in Oakland, in Richmond, in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. There were 5,000 blacks in San Francisco. There were 4,000 blacks in Oakland. There was a total of 18,000 blacks in Oakland and in Berkeley. And most of them in menial positions. That means shining shoes, sweeping streets, working in white people's homes. World War II comes, and so the population shoots up in San Francisco to 40,000. Black people were given tickets to get on a train that Kaiser sponsored, and they were given $50 as rent, and they often lived in units where there were 14 and 15 people in one room. You understand? These were the conditions that black people worked under or lived under. And then they worked in defense plants throughout the Bay Area. The other jobs that blacks had were the waterfront, in which there was a picket in the late 30s. Bridges, who was the head of the ILWU, which my father was a member of, went to black churches and the black community and said, if you do not violate this boycott, we'll hire you afterwards. And so blacks supported the ILWU, and 50% of those working on the docks, on the waterfront in San Francisco were black. And those were probably the best paid jobs that blacks got. But most were working in defense factories. When the war was over, those jobs were largely lost. Only 10% of those working, in many cases, retained their jobs. So blacks found themselves unemployed. And in the black community in San Francisco in the 40s, a man named Charles Augustus started a jobs campaign. It was called the Don't Buy Where You Can't Work. This was a campaign that started in Chicago, led by a man named Sufi Muhammad. These were campaigns to get jobs in the black community, in businesses that did not hire blacks. And you might ask, well, why did blacks have their own businesses? Because blacks weren't allowed to buy property in their own community. In fact, the Fillmore only became open to blacks when Japanese were put in concentration camps. And this is generally not known. Those Japanese that were able to keep their property usually gave it to a black person, and when they came back, the black person gave their property back to them. You understand? That didn't happen with any white folks. But most Japanese found themselves dispossessed. And in case you think blacks came in to stay in the black community, my father was a doorman as well as a longshoreman. He overheard someone who was working for what became the redevelopment agency later saying, as soon as these mortgages are paid off in the Fillmore, we plan to destroy this neighborhood. Because they saw blacks as temporary residents, did not want blacks anywhere here, especially in San Francisco. So I'm saying that to say this, that By 1960, the only jobs that blacks had were service jobs, shining shoes, sweeping streets, working in the post office, or working on the waterfront. And so in 1960, an organization was formed in San Francisco by a woman named Elihu Hutch. Some people know of her, but they don't really know her real accomplishment. When she died, she was my mother's best friend. She was the one that got me involved in the movement. They acknowledged her. Dianne Feinstein, who's now a supervisor, was a keynote speaker, and they acknowledged how she was the first black person to be elected to the Board of Supervisors. They only left out one thing. She was the mother of the San Francisco Civil Rights Movement. And I wouldn't be standing here with whatever consciousness I have but for her. She also was the secretary for the ILWU. And so in 1960, a group called the Congress of Racial Equality was formed. And I'm going to show you some slides in a minute. But what's important to understand is the San Francisco Civil Rights Movement grew out of this migratory pattern, no jobs for blacks and people of color. This was a movement that did not just impact blacks in San Francisco, it impacted blacks in the Bay Area in California, but not just blacks, we fought for people of color as well. This was the mother movement of all the movements in San Francisco. It was the largest of the northern civil rights movements. We put 10,000 people in the streets for a year. It was a 5-year movement that took 5 years to build. This was a movement that gave birth to the free speech movement. This is not generally known. The free speech movement is treated as something that popped out of Mario Savio's head. Mario Savio, who was the principal leader of the free speech movement, got his initiation in civil rights when he was arrested, and you'll see slides in a minute, at the Sheraton Palace Hotel, which was one of the big demonstrations for jobs against the hotel and restaurant industry. He then went to Mississippi and was involved in the Mississippi Summer of 1964, where he was influenced by civil rights organizers there. But the rank and file of the free speech movement were students who got arrested on campaigns for jobs in the San Francisco Civil Rights Movement. You haven't heard that before. The San Francisco Civil Rights Movement gave birth to the Experimental College. Many of the students who were arrested at the Sheraton Palace, some of them conceived of the Experimental College. This was a group that funded programs that brought Leroy Jones, later Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, and others to San Francisco State, and this was the precursor to the Black Studies Department. The San Francisco Civil Rights Movement was, of all the civil rights movements, the only one that successfully attacked economic apartheid, because we were frozen out of the economy. In the South, the issue was political apartheid. In the North, the issue was economic apartheid. The first campaign of the San Francisco Civil Rights Movement was for open housing. That's me right there with Ray Charles sunglasses on. You know what I mean? I figured I had to be cool. In fact, the cops said if they ever caught me in a car with these sunglasses on, you get arrested because there's no peripheral vision. I say, go to hell, man, this is cool. This was the first campaign that we had under my leadership. 1963, I became chair of San Francisco Core. Before me, Will Usry was chair. He was head of what it was on BART Board of Directors. This was a campaign for open housing in a place called Select Rental. Since blacks had this cramped housing, we wanted blacks to have access to housing. And the key thing about CORE was it was the cutting arm of the civil rights movement in San Francisco. We covered all areas, education, housing, employment, but the main struggle was for jobs and for economic development. So this was at a place called Select Rentals, which was just a few blocks away from the school that I went to, junior high school. And here you see demonstrators. This guy right here is Kermit Scott. Kermit Scott was my vice chair. He was 15 years older than me. He was also the campaign manager for Ron Dellums when Ron Dellums ran for his successful campaign for the House of Representatives. And by the way, Ron Dellums' first involvement in the movement occurred when we took over the War on Poverty program. We'll talk about that in a minute.